Okay, guys, so we just got done playing two-step equation bingo yesterday. So today your goal is to do the last chunk of new information that we have before you take your first quiz for this unit, which ideally will happen on Friday. So if you're doing this video lesson, you should have your notes for solving equations by square roots. This is, again, the last one. So far you've done one-step equations, rational equations, two-step equations, and then the fourth lesson, the fourth pink sheet you should have for notes, is solving equations by square roots. So when I can check you off and you show me that you have this done to meeting my standards, that I see your work, then it's thorough, front and back, you're going to check in with me to get homework 4. That is your last homework before your quiz. So ideally you're finishing this lesson on Wednesday, having Wednesday during class, and then that evening to work on homework 4 if you need it. Going over that and reviewing as a class on Thursday, getting yourself caught up on Khan Academy and Edgenuity on Thursday, and then that'll lead us into our quiz on Friday. So make sure you're keeping up. The end of the quarter is December 15th, which is coming close. So just make sure that you're not falling behind and you're asking questions as you go. All right, so for your topic, I'm not actually writing it, so you need to have closed captioning on or have headphones so you're listening. You can just go ahead and write this main idea, solving equations by square roots, for your topic up here. So topic, again, solving equations by square roots. So you have two little bubbles on your paper talking about this new inverse operation that we haven't talked about yet. So far, you know the inverse of multiplication is division. The inverse of addition is subtraction. And same thing, subtraction is the inverse to addition. Addition is the inverse to subtraction. Multiplication is the inverse to division. Division is the inverse to multiplication. It goes both ways. So the new one that I'm going to introduce, if you haven't already guessed, is if we square root something, what's the opposite of that? We haven't talked about this too much, but I guarantee that it's going to look familiar once we start getting going on the first few examples. The issue is there's a special way we're going to have to write our answers because you're going to have more than one solution. So let's fill in our little rectangles first. So in your first box, made it a little bit too small, squared, and I can put in an example like x to the second, is the inverse. I know you can't see what I'm writing yet. Give me a minute. Squared is the inverse to a square root. All right, so if we want to unsquare something, we have to take the square root of it for it to cancel out. And we'll get some examples with numbers instead, so that'll make that easier for you, hopefully. Squared is the inverse of a square root. Pause if you need a minute to write that down before we continue. So we have the same steps as before. If you're looking at steps 1 through 4, they just changed the wording in the second one. To isolate something that's being squared, then we're going to have to remove that coefficient or those constants. Third step, taking that square root or squaring it depending on the situation. So jumping right into number 1, they have the square, they have x squared, can't copy it down right, equals 36. So your job, this is a one-step equation, is to get x by itself. So what a few of you might be thinking is, well, x is already by itself. There's nothing in front of it. You're not adding or subtracting anything behind it. We're good to go. This exponent means that it is not solo. You've got somebody tagging along up there, a little birdie on your shoulder. And again, you need to be alone. You need to be completely by yourself. That needs to go. So it's being squared. So what you just put on the top of your notes, the opposite of squaring something is to square root it. So on both sides, draw your brick wall if you need to, just like all the equations I've done with you so far, making that square root symbol or that radical on each side. So the square root of x squared, those cancel out. The inverse of something squared is to square root it. So that way I'm just left with x and I got rid of that little birdie sitting on my shoulder. Well, the square root of 36, this is a perfect square, so you should know this without a calculator, is 6. Now, in your notes, it says, watch out, these equations can have more than one solution. This is what you got to watch out for. What is 6 times 6? Hopefully 36, right? Because that's what we just put. Another question, what is negative 6 times negative 6? So same signs is going to give us a positive answer. So how you account for both possible answers is by putting that plus sign and a minus sign in front of it. So when you do this, you're telling me that based on this problem given for number 1, that x can equal 6 because 6 times 6 gives me 36, or x can equal negative 6. Negative 6 times negative 6 also gives me a positive 36. So you'll always put this in front of your answer if you're finding the square root of a number, whether it's a perfect square or not. And we'll get to a few that aren't perfect squares and what those look like. If you don't know that the square root of 36 is 6, you can use a calculator while you're practicing on your Chromebook, but remember, you won't have access to that on a quiz on paper and pencil. On this one, and I know everyone's just a little different, I just go to second, and then you see the square root symbol here, pops up, type in 36, hit enter, and you get 6. So again, you may not have one like this, yours may be a little different. Ask me at this time if you need help finding how to take a square root on the calculator you are working with. As you're doing notes, you have tools to Google calculator, whatever you need on your Chromebook, but again, it will not be with you on the actual test, and you cannot rely on me or Miss Cannon. We do not have an unlimited supply of calculators, so get yourself a calculator that can do a square root if this is something you struggle with. Number 2 going across in your notes. 289 equals y squared. So they're just playing with a different variable. Same idea though. Y has a little birdie on their shoulder. That 2's tagging along. That means it's squared because it's in the upper right hand corner. The opposite of squaring something is square root on both sides. Okay, well I know here the square root of y squared will cancel out, just leaving me with y, so that's great. So I need to find the square root of 289. This is another perfect square, maybe not one that you're as familiar with. When you figure that out, you should get 17. Now remember, 17 times 17 gives me 289, or negative 17 and negative 17 will also give me that. So you're accounting for, it could be positive 17 or negative 17, and then that's your answer. So all I'm seeing in terms of your work is you adding the square root symbol on each side and then telling me what the square root of that number is, including your plus or minus for your final answer, and then having that square root cancel out that it's being squared. Easy in terms of steps of work so far. All right, number 3, m squared equals 121. Already drew my brick wall. Opposite of squaring something is to square root. Both sides, whatever you do to one side, you always have to do the same thing to the other side. So m squared in that cancel out. So you're just left with m equals square root of 121. Hopefully we know this one. We know 10 squared is 100. That's an easy one. So let's think a little bit bigger than that. We get 11. We're taking a square root, so you need to account for positive 11 and negative 11 for that final answer. Number 4. 400 equals k squared. So brick wall. K squared, got to get rid of the little birdie on k's shoulder, so that means we'll have to square root for that birdie to go away. K equals 400, you take the square root of that. Hopefully we know this one. 20. Could be positive 20, it could be negative 20. So you need to account for both of those. If you don't put this on your test or your quiz, minus a half. You're not giving me both answers. You're only giving me one answer if you put 20. It could also be negative 20, so you're forgetting half of your answer if you don't do that. Number 5, a squared equals 0. Okay? Squared, you got to unsquare it, so it means we don't actually unsquare something. We call it a square root. That's how we make that happen. Cancels out your little birdie, so a equals, well, square root of 0, just 0, right? 0 times 0 is 0. So there can't be a positive or a negative 0 because 0 is your neutral guy, right? He's in the middle. So this is your only exception of when you don't need to put plus or minus. You can't have negative 0 or positive 0. 0 is the one that's in between those values. So just A equals 0. So this is the one time I'm telling you, okay, you do not need to account for that positive and negative value because there's no such thing with 0. So A equals 0 for number 5. Number 6, r squared equals 196. All right, square root both sides to get, so it's just r and not r squared. Square root of 196, any guesses? Has to be bigger than 10 because we know 10 squared is 100. We already did 289 in number 2, which is pretty big, and that was 17. So it's somewhere between 10 and 17. Hopefully you got 14. Don't just copy down what I'm doing without testing this in the calculator to make sure you can do it on your own. With these video lessons, I highly encourage you to pause, work it out on your own, play the video. You can speed up the speed of it so you don't have to wait as long to check your answer and see if you're right. Then if you did mess up, you can go back and slow it down so you can get a better explanation as I talk through it. Work it out on your own. Use this to check yourself after you get the hang of my steps. All right, so 1 through 6, that's the end of one-step square root equations. Number 7, I'm incorporating a two-step equation with a squared value. So in this case, your date is that little birdie sitting on your shoulder. You're always the variable if I'm talking about my dating scenario I did in the two-step equation lesson. So in this case, it's you and your little bird, you're hanging out. 10 is your third wheel. We'll say that's the annoying cat that's not leaving the bird alone. So you've got to get rid of the annoying cat. So you've got to do the opposite of subtracting 10 and add 10. So this means that you and the little birdie, you're good. Cat went away. X squared equals 49. So far we've done one step. We've added 10 on each side. Second step is to get rid of that being squared, or to take the square root of each side. So this is your second step in the two-step equation. Square root of x squared, will cancel that out, leaving us with x. Square root of 49 is 7. Don't forget, plus or minus values are important. Okay. Last one on the front, another two-step equation. M squared plus 24 equals 33. So you are M, 2 is your little birdie hanging out on your shoulder, 24 is the pesky cat. Get rid of the cat. It's positive 24, so you need to subtract 24 on both sides. Whatever you do to one side, you've got to do to the other side. So 33 minus 24 leaves you with 9. So M squared equals 9. Second step is to unsquare that, or square root both sides. So those will cancel out, leaving me with just my variable of M. So you're good. Put the birdie in the cage, called it a day. Square root of 9 is 3, but it could also be negative 3. So you include the plus or minus in front of it. This is how it's always going to be written. You're going to maybe see that on a multiple choice question when you take SC Ready in the spring. Very common way to just let you know, hey, it could be positive 3 or negative 3, and it's a quicker way of writing it instead of saying 3 or negative 3 every single time. We can just write this symbol, and that's telling us the same thing. Okay, front of your notes should be perfect. I'm at 14 minutes, so I'm going to end this first video. You're going to go to the second video to go ahead and get the back of the notes accomplished.